Wow. Thank you so much, Tendai. I owe it to Tendai that I can mix any color in anywhere that I go, anywhere in the world. I can go, okay, I know exactly how to mix that color right there. Um, but also just thanks to Tendai and Hoa, and in especially as an undergrad and as a student, as a first generation um, going to college with immigrant parents that supported my journey in saying I want to be an artist, which is really difficult for immigrant parents, right? They want you to be a doctor, a lawyer, etc. To be in a space where I could find instructors and educators, and now a friend like Tendai, was just so essential in my development. So other than just learning the skills, but just knowing that somebody could understand my experience and where I was coming from was so incredibly important in that time. So if I haven't said it before, thank you. And again, you're also on the list of who are the amazing teachers that are in my life that I will never forget. And it's always connecting to Tendai. Thank you. I want to thank the Montgomery College for inviting me here. It's just such a great experience to be here, to learn about what's happening here in terms of the student body, in terms of the curriculum, the programming, and specifically not just in the learning, but just in about the diversity and social change and social justice work that's happening here is really inspiring and great to hear. I also, want to thank Usha and Kaylin, and also the tech team for hooking this all up. So I'm going to start, and there's many projects, but I'm going to really highlight a number of them, and then we'll have some time afterwards to share and ask questions. Is it possible to lower the lights a little bit here in the front? Thank you. It's a little bright. Okay. So for 20 years now, I've been utilizing public art and public spaces as a way to create platforms for social change. I am a child of immigrants, a woman of color, a product of two people that experienced poverty that led them to immigrate into this country. So it's within this context that I see my work as cultural currency that I use to invest back into the communities that I feel connected to or come from very similar experiences as my own. So I understood at an early age that stories are incredibly powerful, especially within the context that they're represented. And my experience in terms of where, when I think about my work as an artist in advocating social justice and supporting the activism and the change that needs to happen, I really think back into what my journey has been, right? And I think that for all of us, thinking back into our own personal experiences and where we're coming from gives us a better understanding of not just where we are, but also where we are going. And so I like to share the story of when I was 7 years old. So it was in the mid-1980s. And my parents were going to take us to Colombia for the very first time. And it was a lot of the neighbors, our neighbors in South Philadelphia, was born and raised and still live, really thought that my parents were crazy, to take your small young children to what was at the time in the midst of these drug wars and violence that was happening in Colombia. And so it was when I visited Colombia and my parents moving forward because they wanted us to connect with our family, is when I could see the spiritual richness of the people that shined brighter than the poverty surrounding them. And so the children with no shoes and holes in their clothes that were our friends that we played with had a really big and huge desire to and willingness to learn. And those same children were reflections of who my parents once were, And so when I think about the work that I do and every step that I take, it's really thinking about how I'm carrying those experiences and those struggles along with me. And as I see myself reflected in that young child who's a child of immigrants, who's helping their parents translate papers into Spanish or English, or struggling themselves in kind of managing and being in these two worlds. But I also understand that when I rise, they rise with me. And so these personal experiences, again, inform my creative process. And then it's activated in conversations and dialogues that then move into writings, that then move into movement, move into a space where we're building trust, and then manifest into visual representations of these messages that are being built with the community. So, thank you. So a little bit about where I grew up and I continue to still live is in South Philadelphia, where we are actually are home to one of the oldest outdoor markets in the United States, which is called, if you're from the neighborhood, we call it the 9th Street Market. Others call it the Italian Market, but there are many more people than just Italian families and communities there. Several blocks away from this market is where this mural stands, which is on 6th and Dickinson. And the mural itself was created and placed in a community where there was a growing Mexican, and still is a growing Mexican and Central American undocumented community. Along within this community, there are also many families that are from Southeast Asia and also African American families. And so the intention to do this mural, which is entitled Aquí en Allá, was to really open a space where young people, there were about 8 to 10 teens in Philadelphia during a span of a summer program in which we started talking about their journey and having them, most of them had crossed the border as unaccompanied youth, meaning on their own, or with a parent, or with their parents. And so the piece itself is really talking about the impact of immigration and the impact of immigration within the family dynamic. So when we think about a young child that is immigrating, in this case, a child is being reunited with their parents. Some of them hadn't seen their parents since they were children, right? Since they were little babies, and then they are being reunited with their parents at age 8 or 10 years old. So it's really about reconstructing that family dynamic. And so these panels, the images that you see with Aquí and Allá, were all created by both the students in Philadelphia, which was the previous circle that you saw in the other image, and these panels were created by students and teens who live in Juarez in Chihuahua City, which is the border town of El Paso, Texas. And so these images were then mailed to Philadelphia and physically installed onto this mural. Another thing that I'm really proud about in terms of that particular project was that some of the artists, I was able to bring 4 artists from previous Cultural Envoy programs that they are artists in their own right, and so we had shared some skill sets while I was there, and then I was able to bring them to the United States through my relationship with the Cultural Envoy. And so thinking about my own role as an artist and kind of creating these opportunities which are sustainable, that I have the privilege to go to Mexico, but then those artists should also have the privilege to come to the United States and connect with the communities here and be able to learn and gain a new network of resources. So from murals to public art installations, it's really about, when I talk about engaging community, it's also thinking about the issues of responsibility and accountability and ethics. And so it's really thinking about how am I connecting not just with the community. In this case, I worked with the indigenous community, the Mazawa and Otomi community, who are based in Querétaro in Mexico and migrated to Mexico City. Many of these communities, although Mexico has a lot of history and pride within the indigenous culture, but the rights of the indigenous living and breathing people are still being violated, and the communities are still fighting for decent housing, for good education, for health resources. So the Mazawa and Otomi community is a shining example of them fighting for 20 years to be able to have access to decent housing after claiming empty spaces, empty lots, and creating these casones based on scrap metal and materials that they were able to find. And so what you see here in this next short video that I'm about to show you is a mural, a 60-foot tall mural that we created in Chapultepec in Mexico City, at the very apartment building that was finally built to house 60 families. And just to give you a sense of, I worked with an NGO called Habitajes, who has worked with communities and public spaces for 6 months before my arrival to connect with the families there. So there's all this work that needs to happen in my sake and in my process to be able to then connect with the families. So what you're about to see is also the folks that participated are a collection of 10 local artists that I train within community art strategies and large-scale public art, making murals at this scale. And then we see both the indigenous youth and the elders. So what's great about this building is that there were little balconies that the elders can actually walk to and add to the mural without having to physically go on top of the scaffolding. The writing that you're about to also see briefly within this image is both in Ñañu, which is the native language of the Otomi people, and in Spanish. And so what was important is that whomever is visiting, there are messages that are speaking directly to their own families and to their people, and there are messages that are communicating specifically to the visitors that are coming in their space.
Spark it up, get your whole house burnt down to a crisp. Let me give you all the rundown. It ain't never been a cause for me to turn down. So get ready when you hear we about to come round. Now, feel the rhythm in your backbone. You ain't shaking what you're coming in the shack mode. Act mode like you wanna party when the track on. I'ma give it to you full throttle when attack mode. Satch mode when I'm on this stage. Claim that I burn the whole DAC burn stage. When I wrote him and it burned through the DAC burn page.
That was my husband singing from Gangsta Grass. So the mural itself was such a great moment. That was created in 2015. So from 2015 through 2017, the community began to create more and more murals based on what they've learned through stencil making, through direct grid application onto the wall. And I was invited back to go work with the community. So the community that now resides in, the families that reside in Mexico City, wanted to go back to Querétaro, where they migrated from, which is about a 3-hour drive away, and create a mural in their main plaza. And so that was just a beautiful kind of like full circle experience, because the same group of people that already learned some of these techniques and had done murals besides the one that we did together, we were able to go back to their community and be able to give back. And that same team was able to help me execute and implement this mural that is now in their main plaza, where they do most of their celebrations throughout the year. Another great project was called Journey South, Different Paths to One Market. And so we're now traveling from Mexico back to my hometown, and in the 9th Street Market, which I had mentioned. And so I worked with immigrant communities in beginning to collect not just letters and images and photographs, but utilize that and begin to use the actual aesthetic and the structures in which people are moving through. So instead of resulting in a mural, the same process is the same with the community, but in this case, I was able to get the designs and place them on their actual stands where they sell produce all year long. So if you're not familiar with Philadelphia or the 9th Street Market, we got the old school metal cans with fire at 30 degree weather or in the heat of the sun. And so the concept was to really begin to create these awnings and change these awnings, which the natural light was coming through to illuminate the stories of each one of the vendors, of the people who are selling produce but have a deep connection to the market. And so thinking about the common thread of the immigration story, that includes my own in this space, and beginning to connect folks like Rosalio, who's a recently arrived immigrant, and Judy, who has been there, Judy, who's an immigrant from China, who recently retired, and begin to make those connections that surpass the labeling of just one particular group, to really represent the diversity that exists within the market, but most importantly, the common thread that we all have together. And so this is just a great example in terms of thinking about when I go into spaces and I think about my public artwork, it doesn't always result in a mural. It can result in other ways that really actually adds or is part of the existing aesthetic that already is present and actually created by the community. And so it was really important that these awnings were functional, that protected the vendors from the light, from sun, from the rain, and at the same time can be rolled up and rolled out. But I felt that it was also a really beautiful moment to be able to have the people that go by and buy produce every day to actually have a conversation and begin to connect and know the person that they're purchasing their produce with, that they're feeding themselves, and begin to understand and know about their stories. And for the vendors who are kind of really territorial about their stands, to begin to learn about their own connections and their own stories. So in around 2017, so shortly after I did the mural with the community in Querétaro, I was producing my project, which is called Seguimos Caminando, which is part of the Monument Lab citywide exhibition. Some of the artists included Hank Willis Thomas, who had the Power to All People monument, and Melchin's monument that was in City Hall. So this installation was kind of sandwiched in between those other two monuments. And this was during the time where monuments were being torn down and still continue to be throughout our nation. And so it was a very timely piece. This was also during the time where I began connecting with the 14 mothers that were detained at a family prison in the state of Pennsylvania. The state of Pennsylvania has one of the oldest one of the three family prisons, but it's the oldest in the United States, where they do detain children and have detained children as young as 9 weeks old to teenagers. And In this case, there were 14 mothers that were detained for close to 2 years with their young children. So it was during this time that I started connecting with the mothers, visited the mothers for a span of 5 months at the prison. And we created, based on their writings and their stories, and they were illustrated through drawings that I created, because the mothers, we couldn't take photos. The mothers were very limited in what they could do inside of the prison, but they're their actual words. So what I'm about to play is the animated projection that was placed on the gates, north gates of City Hall. And so just to give you some context, where we think about Philadelphia, we're also home to the Declaration of Independence, the Liberty Bell, all of these symbols of liberty and justice and freedom. And what does this mean when about an hour and a half away, we're incarcerating women and children seeking refuge? And so this piece is, this is one excerpt from one of the mothers, and the voice that you're about to hear is one of the mothers days after her release from the center.
Caminaba por la casa de mi mamá sobre el suelo de tierra. Jugaba con mis hermanos, meciendo la hamaca de multicolores y envueltos de árboles, de jocote y cerezas que bailaban con el viento. Junto con mi mamá íbamos al río soleado para bañarnos. Años después, jugaba con mis hijos en ese mismo río. Un día me amenazaron y me tocó irme, dejando a mis hijas. Entre llantos, me llevé a mi hijo de 2 años y una mochila de ilusiones, estancados por el tiempo.
It's in Spanish, so I'll read the short excerpt that was in the beginning. I pray at night, and I look through my window, and I would like to touch the stars. I would like to become one of them, to shine in the dark and walk along with my son towards freedom. And so this is just 2 stories combined from the mothers, which we worked on together. We edited. The mothers were able to make adjustments as needed. And what you're seeing in terms of the story being told is really her memory. They're both of the mothers' memories of playing in the river, of what led them to cross and make that hard decision to leave. And so the relationship of the river, right? A place where you remember as a child with your feet playing, and then that be the very same river that you then have to cross with your child, and it becomes more dangerous, right? And so it was really about projecting, these images onto City Hall and hearing the voice of Lorena echo throughout our City Hall, throughout and around these monuments and images of freedom and justice, as I had mentioned. So during the time that I was visiting the mothers, we also, what I was able to bring were very limited materials. So I was able to bring paper and pen and pencils. And so one thing that we had in common was actually making paper flowers. And I remember making paper flowers with my grandmother as a little girl in the kitchen. We made over 100 when I was married, and that decorated the spaces. Anytime we thought about celebration, we were always making these paper flowers. And that was one thing that the mothers and I had in common. And so I thought, okay, this would be something that we can creatively do together. And then the mothers decided to write down their writings and their messages and hopes of freedom. So the mothers created about 20 of these messages of freedom and hope that traveled outside of the confines of the center. And then that became the inspiration of this moving monument called Flores de Libertad. So Flores de Libertad was basically paired with Seguimos Caminando. So in the evening, you would be able to see the projection, But this is a one-day action that happened that was then led by a press conference with the Shutdown Burkes Coalition, a coalition of organizers and activists and organizations that are fighting to end family detention, specifically in the state of Pennsylvania. So what we were able to create were, along with the mothers, I did a number of workshops at the Barnes Foundation, and we had close to, about 40 participants coming in within the span of like 10 to 15 workshops. And so together we were able to create the 1,600 hand-dyed paper flowers with all messages of freedom that were assembled to represent the word libertad. And libertad, freedom, was placed at those very same gates where the projection was happening throughout the evening. And as I mentioned, was then followed by the press conference. Apparently that day, the Governor Tom Wolf, who is a Democratic governor, but has done very little to shut down the center. The center itself is a county-run facility, so he has the power to issue an emergency release order for the mothers for families to be removed, at that time for the mothers to be removed. And so he did not react in any way to the actual installation, but I know that he saw it. And so I'll talk a little bit more about some of this work around that. So during this time, I was starting the second phase of my Familias Separadas project, but just to kind of backtrack, in 2013, Familias Separadas, which stands for Separated Families, is when I had started this project, and it was during the rise of deportations within our country. I'd like to mention that it's 2013 because it happened before the Trump administration, the high number of deportations. And so communities, especially undocumented immigrant communities, are now at a higher risk of being targeted now through this current administration, but this has been going on for some time. The main goal of Familias Separadas was really to shift the numbers of families and loved ones that have been deported and separated from this system, this detention system, to begin to see really the father, mother, child, and hear their stories and see their images and hear their stories firsthand. And so for this first phase, I did a number of 5 installations in Philadelphia and worked together with Juntos, which is a local immigrant rights organization in Philadelphia. And some of those installations included, it's not moving, there we go. Some of these installations included the courtyard in City Hall. What you see here is the image of one of the paintings. So the painting itself is 18 inches in diameter, and what you're about to see it is in 18 feet installed in the courtyard, which is a permanent on top of the Compass Rose. The Compass Rose was created by Edmund Bacon, and it is a permanent public art piece in the center of Philadelphia, where it marks north, south, east, and west. It is the center point of the city. So in this center point is where I placed the image of Maria and her daughter. And eres mi todo are the words of her husband, who was deported, spent 3 years in California in detention, and then deported finally back to Mexico. As we have the image of William Penn looming above, or the scenes that you see in Philadelphia at times, right? You also have right below him is this compass, and that is where Maria is. So it's about bringing her image and the image and the story of 50,000 undocumented immigrant people who live in our city and contribute to our city every day at the center of the conversation. And so it was really about bringing her story. And Maria is one of those folks who's incredibly quiet. I was able to connect with her through another friend of hers, his name is Cruz. The process that it took for me to talk to her, she actually screened the call when I did call her for the first time. And I think as an artist, what's really important is that we're very clear about what our intentions are. And so Maria, being a very quiet person, had also a really deep need to tell her story. And so she's not someone who will come up to the mic, but because I was able to connect with her and she understood how this image and story was going to be magnified, she then was very eager to participate in the project. This is her son standing in front of the piece with the letters, the handwritten words from one of his father's letters. Another installation that I did was actually as part of this phase one was at Love Park, the old version. If you go back to Philadelphia, you're not going to see this. And it was placed in close proximity to the Robert Indiana Love sculpture. So when you see people going and taking selfies with their families, before when we had the big fountain, a lot of families will come together and play in the water in the summer. I wanted to create, the image of Suyapa's necklace. Suyapa is an immigrant from Honduras. She carried this gold necklace from her daughter, which says "Te amo," I love you, and it was one of those prized possessions that she carried with her as she crossed. She currently is one of 3 families that are in sanctuary in 2 churches in Philadelphia and still fighting against her deportation. And when all of these installations are accompanied with very short audio clips of each one of the families, and Suyapa speaks to what happens to love when you're forced to leave. She left 2 sons behind, and now has some of her children here in the United States, and the difficulty of what happens to love or a mother's love. So when we think about, really the deportation system, it really falls into the system of mass incarceration. It falls into the targeting of Black and brown communities specifically. One of the installations highlighted Cruz's story. Cruz was just riding his bicycle on Washington Avenue. This is part of where the market is and where I still currently live. The Washington Avenue is actually a place where a lot of the Italian immigrants found refuge and place. So it is a very historical landmark in terms of the history of immigration within the city of Philadelphia. And what you see is the image of Cruz. So this was chalk sprayed onto the actual asphalt, and a part of his story was that he was delivering pizza, didn't realize he was delivering pizza at the ICE facility on 16th and Callow Hill. He was detained. He was given papers. They did not give him a translator, which was what his right was. He was detained for 3 days, and for an entire year had to wear a probation bracelet. The probation bracelets are owned by private companies, in which in most cases, the folks who have the probation bracelet on have to pay to rent those probation bracelets that are incarcerating them in their own home. During our last interview with Cruz, where he had mentioned his whole ordeal, he finally took him 20 years to actually finally have his green card, and he was able to see his mother after not seeing her for 20 years back in Mexico. And so even though he has his green card, he still feels fearful in our city. And so the concept of the chalk spray onto this particular avenue was for the cars and the pedestrians to actually walk on top and wash away his image, as a metaphor to how many of the other family members and loved ones that have been deported that are being erased in contributing to the livelihood and richness of our city. Okay, so the building that you see here is the ICE facility that detained Cruz. This is located on 16th and Callow Hill in Philadelphia. This is the same immigration building that I would go to with my mother to get our passports to go to Colombia, because it used to just be the immigration center. There were no people detained at that time. So now this Immigration Customs Enforcement building is the most aggressive in the United States, meaning it has a high number of non-criminal arrests, and it has jurisdiction in Pennsylvania, Delaware, New Jersey. And so this is where I decided to do one of the largest installations, which is called We Are Human Beings, and 30 volunteers through the Juntos organization, along with other allies and activists, And I led this group of 30 volunteers on Monday, October 12th, which Indigenous Peoples Day in 2015. And we laid down the words of Ana, one of the mothers that was currently detained at the Burke's family prison. These words were placed at the exit point where loved ones are then transported from the ICE building out into prisons and jails to continue their deportation proceedings. And so what you see here is actually the time lapse of that evening where all of the family members who would never really step foot near this building that represents so much fear were fearless in laying down these words of Ana. So what you see here is we are human beings risking our lives for our families and our future. And so when I think about messages, you know, we have screw ICE, which they use another word, or they use, you know, si se puede, or yes we can. And I felt that it was always really important when we're thinking about, and specifically for me and the messages that we're putting out there, that they're coming directly from the community, but that, you know, we're thinking of messages that haven't really lost their meaning. And so in this case, it was really important to lay down these words and a powerful moment where people don't really get to witness and that I can share with you was after we had finished the installation, we had ICE agents looking down on us as we finished the installation. And so all of the organizers came together and then we began to chant and say different verses of positivity for the folks who are detained in the actual facility that we had placed the words down. So that was phase one, and then in 2017, I started the phase two of my Familias Separadas project. And so as I mentioned about Berks, the 14 mothers that were detained for those 2 years had organized labor and hunger strikes for their freedom. They were all had credible asylum cases. And then it was also during this time that 10 out of the 14 families were deported back to El Salvador after being detained for 2 years with their young children. And so when I think about the artwork and then in terms of these pieces, there were a number of 8 installations that I installed in Harrisburg. Harrisburg is the capital of Pennsylvania, so phase 1 was in the city. Phase 2 was thinking about family detention and deportation within our state. And so why is it important? Why am I focusing in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania? Because when we think about the immigration narrative, it's very much centered on the border towns. It's very much centered on La Frontera. And I feel that it's really important for us to look at this immigration issue as something that is spreading throughout our entire nation and that has existed in other spaces. You know, people do not know about Berks. They don't know that this family prison exists. They also don't know about the other detention centers that we have in our state. And so I feel that it's incredibly important that we talk about that and we're included in that conversation, because in order for us to make the change that needs to happen, we need to be able to look at our entire nation and what's the change that we want to have happen. So in this case, I visited the mothers at a time where 10 of the families were deported, where they had felt their lawyers, their organizers have felt that they've lost. And so it was really about utilizing writing and conversation, creating those flowers, beginning to think about what messages they wanted to represent, to really deal with this trauma and fear that they were dealing with, right? And the feeling of powerlessness. And so throughout these moments, when I connected with the mothers, I asked them 3 core questions. What gives you strength in moments of darkness? When is a moment that you felt the most free? And what is your wish for yourself and for your child? So in a time where we have also other, we're looking at our Facebook feed, we're looking at other public art installations, and they're very much built on, here's a cage, here's a child, this is the suffering, and we understand that the suffering is happening. But for somebody who has gone through that journey and has survived, that is extremely triggering. For somebody that sees that, it makes them relive that trauma again. And so for me, at this moment, in the work that I'm doing, I feel that we need to have a balance between the shock value of presenting images and creating installations and especially artwork to say this is what's going on so people can wake up. But we also need to create spaces and create artwork that uplifts the power and resilience of the families that are directly impacted by this issue. And so these installations begin as you walk, as you drive into Harrisburg, and conveniently is also the driving route of the governor. And so you see these billboards, and we installed these. I worked together with the Shut Down Burkes Coalition to find out a strategy of when was the best time to actually present and display and unveil these pieces so that it goes in line with their advocacy efforts. So we decided to unveil all of these works at the end of October, right before elections in November 2018. And so you see the billboards, and then there were bus shelters that were also created. These are directly across the Capitol steps, and they're all utilizing the words directly from the mothers, of which they were coming from their transcripts from their hour-long interviews that I did with them. So the 4 mothers were living and currently live in their respective cities outside of Pennsylvania after they were released from the center. The 4 mothers still had to wear probation bracelets, still to this day have to have ICE come to their home every week, and they need to go to the ICE offices and report themselves every month. So the risk of being separated from their child or possibly being deported is still looming over them, even though they're outside of the center. And so this was one of the installations that I created on the Capitol steps, an 88-foot-long vinyl decal installation. It's a reproduction of Karen and her son portraits. And so Karen and her son were detained for 651 days at the Burkes Detention Center. Above them is the actual office of the governor. And installed on the Capitol steps was really thinking about how can I bring visibility, how can I have people not ignore her story and the story of her child. Stephen, her son, who was 6 years old at the time, had 2 suicide attempts while he was at the family prison. And Karen and her son were the ones who were part of the 10 families that were deported. So out of all of this, I created a 30-minute documentary, which I'll be showing a clip of in a few minutes. And the documentary actually represents, most importantly, the stories of the mothers at the forefront, the mothers telling their own stories. So I'm here speaking and sharing this information with you, but the documentary serves as a way for people to actually hear firsthand from the mothers what they've gone through, what are their messages, and also to be able to provide throughout the documentary these moments of love and tenderness with their children, because that's the driving force of why they've decided to sacrifice and make this journey. And that's also what's has held them together while they were detained. So this was one of the permanent installations out of the 8 that still reside in Harrisburg. So if you go to Harrisburg, you can see this mural. It's in the heart of the immigrant community, which is in Allison Hill. And so what you see on the Capitol steps is the image of Karen, and on the sides, which I'm not showing today, there's a phrase that she says, "What would you do if your child asked you, why can't I be free?" And so that was necessary, that messaging was necessary in the Capitol steps. In this case, in Allison Hill, in a community, an immigrant community that's constantly being under attack by local and state police with ICE raids, it was important to have a message that was uplifting, an image that was uplifting and that represented strength. So these are the words of Delmi, one of the 4 mothers I interviewed, and her story reads, her message reads, "My son is the only one that gives me strength. Mi hijo es el único que me da fuerza." And so this image is what you see in Allison Hill. And in November, I organized with the Shut Down Burkes Coalition a statewide march against family detention around this time frame, right before elections. And we marched, our march began at the Capitol steps, and we walked to this mural to end the march here. And so I think for the activists and organizers in the room, originally the idea was to have the march and then we would go to the governor's house, which is empty. It's like a mansion, and to march there to make a point. And I felt that it was necessary for us to make our point at the Capitol steps, but then to arrive at a message of positivity and power, because we need to continue in these times of hardships and obstacles that are happening and the struggles that are happening within our communities. We need to be able to organize and be in the presence of each other, and to be able to acknowledge the strength that we have for one another and the love that we have for our community. So it became kind of, in a sense, a celebration of that image.
With those set of eyes, we really took a look at the moms, as families, as a mom, not as somebody who's here unlawfully or who entered unlawfully, but, as asylum seekers. And we tend to forget that, they are fleeing a lot of things, but yet they're asylum seekers. And having the detention center being so close by, about 40-minute drive from Harrisburg, and then a 50-minute walk from Allison Hill to the Capitol steps, I think it's a good connecting piece, connecting pathway, that being so close to the Capitol is so far away from us.
Y al gobernador, pues lo que le dije una vez al oficial de inmigración: póngase en mis zapatos y dígame, ¿qué le contestaría a su hijo si su hijo le dice: mamá, ¿por qué no podemos ir por un helado? Mamá, ¿por qué no podemos ir por ropa? Mamá, ¿por qué no puedo salir? Mamá, ¿por qué no puedo ir a un parque? Mamá, ¿por qué no puedo ser libre? Quisiera que él se pusiera en los zapatos de nosotros y que tomara 2 minutos de su tiempo y que tratara de analizar el daño y el trauma que les está haciendo a los niños. Eso.
Pues el mensaje que yo les mando pues a los padres, tanto como a algunas madres que siguen detenidas, pues como yo lo hacía todos los días, de orarle a Dios. Nosotros declaramos victoria, declaramos libertad y que cantábamos que íbamos a ser libres, y así fue como Dios nos pudo sacar. Siempre nosotros decíamos que vamos a ser libres, vamos a salir de aquí, vamos a salir en victoria, y así fue como nosotros salimos.
Una nube nada más, voy contando aguaceros de amapola y flamboyán, y el olor del agua guayaba hoy me sabe a libertad.
So, thank you. So we were able to capture this moment of Delmi and her son standing in front of the mural. This happened in November 3rd, 2018, and she lost her life to a really tragic and violent event in the following month, in December 2018. Luckily, her son has his biological father in the United States, and he's still protected by his asylum status. And it was very unexpected, a very unexpected, tragic loss. And so one thing that I find is that, not knowing this, her mural and her message is the one that is the permanent mural and installation in Harrisburg that we can always go back to, and now has become a memorial to her and her life and her struggle. But it is also a memory for her own child, right? And so I was able to share with him video footage and writings and drawings and all of the things that they were able to do together, and have that as a living archive for him, and for him to remember his mother. But I also feel that every time I share this story and share the documentary and the video serves as that tool. so that the other mothers who are still living and trying to move forward and past this experience, they don't have to tell their story over and over and over again. The film is a tool for that to happen. But at the same time, it is a way to continue to honor Delmi. And one of the things that she says, obviously in the end of the film, is what was her message to those families. And so to be able to show the documentary is a way to fight for those families like her own while they were in there. So even though she lost her life in a very tragic way, I try to hold on to this moment, right? In which not only she was able to see the piece, but she was able to also connect with one of the other mothers that came, because they're all living in different cities that was close enough to Harrisburg to come and actually see the piece. And I never saw her son and her smile so big. And one thing that she said to me was, in Spanish is, me hiciste tan grande. And I responded to her as, te hice tan grande como eres. And she said to me, you made me so large and so big. And I said, I made you as large as you are, right? And so I hold on to these moments, and I think that people see the public artwork, but really the connections that I have with the community, and the honor and respect that I have for the people that are fighting for, fighting against injustice, fighting against the inequities that we have around us. For me, in terms of, my light is brightened by seeing that is still continuing to happen around me. So I'll leave you all with that. Thank you.